First of what I hope to be a series, or what I plan to be a series called On Being Creative. Thank you to the Guelph Arts Council. When I approached Damien with this concept, I pitched it to him expecting a debate or a whole bunch of questions, and he was just like, cool, when do you want to do it? So I was like, okay, let's look at the calendar, and away we went. So thank you for your trust in this concept. And I also want to thank, so Guelph Arts Council is the sponsor, and we're in the new artBar, call it that, stop calling it that other thing that it used to be.
Okay, it can always be the e-bar.
Oh, okay, all right. It can be the e-bar, but it won't say that in print. So yeah, the Guelph Arts Council sponsoring, and then we also have partners with Ed Video Media Arts Center. Chris here is operating cameras, so we are going to record this, yes, to Ed Video. We will post this on YouTube, hopefully next week. And then all those poor people that were not able to make it tonight, you can say, you got to see this thing. You're not going to believe what you missed. And then they can watch it. So that's a little bit of that. Let me tell you a bit about what this is, who I am and what this is. So I'm Peter Sabo. I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker, sometimes amateur musician, on and off. My father was a watercolor artist. My mother was a banker. And they separated and divorced when I was very young. But I grew up with this belief, I'll just say, that art and creativity was either for famous people or for people that didn't make money, right? That it was a bit frivolous, that it was not practical. So I wrestled with this for decades because it was something that was still really strong within me. I had this drive to tell stories, to write, and then to play music, and it was just like, but then the notion of doing it for a living and doing it all day, every day, and just like riding that high all the time, I would crash into this, oh, but it's not practical. So I did some personal work a few years ago, and I recognized this belief that I just described to you because it was invisible to me, that I was having this belief system that was stopping me. So what I did was just recognize it's a part of who I am. And it doesn't matter if it's attached to money or not. That's always a bonus, I guess, but that's not it's not like all or nothing. In fact, I came to identify myself as creativity. Who I am is creativity, period. And then I got to see, oh, and there's lots and lots of other people out there. In fact, I think every human being on the planet has a creative spirit, has something they either already manifesting or something that they have thought about and never have done, or that they're working on. But I think it's part of who we are as human beings. And I think that it's part of what makes us unique. It's part of how we express ourselves. So that's where the concept for this came around. I thought, can I create a forum, a space where people can learn from other creators what their process is and sort of, I don't know about validate it, but at least have it, reinforced. Oh, okay, there's lots of people out there. And not just conventional creative stuff like songwriting and filmmaking and fine art and things like that, but it could be cooking, it could be woodworking, it could be macrame, it could be interior design. All these areas, in fact, I know that like Rob McLean, who taught at the University of Guelph business and marketing, would bring in this amazing pieces of creativity into an approach to business. So it really can come out of anybody in any way. So that's this series. I'm planning to bring a different creator in and have a conversation, have them demonstrate something or talk about their work. And then this next part of the evening is participatory. So you can't just sit in your chairs once we're done up here. It's about now you talking to other people and finding out, have you got something you already are doing to create and that you could share with others, and you can talk to them about that? Or is there something you wondered about that you haven't actually had the courage to discuss and say, yeah, I've always secretly wanted to write a novel or something? So that you can just sort of reach out to people, and then it's almost like a little bit of a networking thing, and find some resources. And if it's not in the room, the Guelph Arts Council can help you. At Video and Media Arts Center might be able to help you. You can ask James or I. There's all kinds of, if you can't find it in the room tonight, let us know, and we'll see what we can do about connecting you with somebody in the community that will support you to just even have a conversation and explore that. So that's what I want to create, and that's why you're all here tonight. And we're going to move on now. We're going to move on to our first creator, which is James Gordon. I had to whittle down your bio. So I hope you don't mind that he's just done so much, and it's all fantastic, but you know, it'd take a long time to go through all the stuff he's done. And I thought it was, yeah, more important that we hear him actually share what he wants to say from his mouth and from his guitar. And so we're going to get some songs and stories from him too. But as a solo singer-songwriter and the groundbreaking trio Tamarack, he's recorded 40 albums, toured relentlessly around the world, written for symphony orchestras, musical theater and dance, scored films, and for more than 10 years was heard on CBC Radio as songwriter in residence for the Basic Black and Ontario morning programs. When he's not touring, he's also a record producer, playwright, community activist, theater director, and you served 2 terms as city councillor. Have you got over that yet? Actually, we have another one in the room.
Yeah.
This is good.
Recovering. Covered in numbers. Starting a support group.
Ex-councillors, ex-city councillors. Songwriting in the schools. You've got this Songwriting in the Schools program called Rhyme Capsules, which has brought you all over the world creating songs with students of all ages, earning you a place of honor on the Wall of Fame in Guelph's Youth Music Center. And then in 2023, this year, you have been named Artist in Residence for the City of Guelph with your project Rhyme Capsules, Guelph's Tale Told in Story and Song. And your goal is to collect firsthand stories from lifelong Guelphites. Does that mean they have to have been born here?
No, I'll take anyone now.
Okay.
Especially you guys.
But specifically, but not exclusively seniors, but to facilitate, and you're going to facilitate turning those stories into songs and poems that'll help define our collective community identity. And this will culminate in a performance and a recording session in the fall, right? Recording session to create an album so that you'll have something to leave behind digitally for future generations. And you have some experience at that because you've got The Arc of the Oven Mitt as a musical novel, which, yeah, I've got a copy here. And that includes a downloadable 36 songs. So you read the book, and every 10, 15 pages or whatever, there's a song that is part of the story, that the musicians or the people in the book, they're singing it, and then you get to hear it. So it's a brilliant concept. And then you did it for The Highway and I, which is your newest book, right? The Highway and I, Tales from My 40-Year Romance with the Road. 19 road songs with that one.
True.
So have you got either of those at the back table?
Why, thanks for the merch plug. Yes, there's an extensive James Gordon boutique at the back there, and I would love to impart more information about this Artist in Residence project too, in case I can incorporate any of your stories as well.
Great. Excellent. So you can talk to James afterwards then. And yeah, and you can you get both the Highway and the Ark of the Oven Mitt on Bandcamp?
Yes.
Okay, so Bandcamp is where you can go, at least for the Ark of the Oven Mitt. He also recorded him reading the book.
Yeah, it's an audio book as well.
Yeah, it's an audio book with the songs in place. So you hear him read a chapter or segment of a chapter, then you hear the song. So it's quite magical. And I think that's enough. It's
I'm
not.
exhausted. I'm going home.
So James Gordon, everyone, please welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do that land acknowledgement now, maybe. I want to acknowledge that we are on dish with one spoon territory. The dish traditionally represents the land that is to be shared peacefully, and the spoon represents the individuals living on and using the resources of the land in a spirit of mutual and creative cooperation. Those peoples make a point of keeping the dish and spoon clean, taking only what they need, caring for and nurturing a sustainable environment, and we have much to learn from and be grateful for the stewardship that they have long shown all across Turtle Island. We are on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Treaty 3, the Between the Lakes Treaty, who along with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Métis and Inuit as well, all invite all into the Between the Lakes Treaty in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I invite you to reflect on how we can honor that spirit.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. I know I did a land acknowledgement recently, and it's good to get out there and learn more and understand it. And then if you can, actually take some action too. Just to keep the reconciliation process going. Go see a movie, read a book, whatever, and Indigenous stuff. There's all kinds of wonderful stuff. They had a whole series of them at the bookshelf last month. And so there's lots of opportunity out there. All right, let's talk about creativity and you as a creator. We're going to talk a little, then he's going to read a story, sing a song. We'll kind of go back and forth here. So let's go back to your beginning. You've got a little bit about my childhood, but I'd love to know who inspired you, who sort of made you first realize, oh, creating is a thing that people do, that's something creative.
Well, my father was a bagpiper, which some people would debate how creative that is or not. But he did it since he was a kid, and despite the number of instruments that I attempt, I'm still the shame of the Gordon family because I don't play the bagpipes. But I think it was always around, and I could see I inherited his workaholism from him, so I could always see when he finally stopped working, he'd often pick up the pipes, stroll around the yard. And I thought, okay, that's the release that he needs. And then when I was in high school, I went to Centennial High School here in Guelph. I was the shortest person in the high school, and I was bussed in, so I was a social reject. I just had a hard time fitting in socially, but I found refuge in the high school band and in the drama department doing plays, and both at that high school at that time was very well known for both of those. And what I recognized, I was interested in both those things, but that was my first experience really, because I grew up in the country just outside of Guelph. I thought, oh, this must be what community is, right? There, you'd find people together sharing something, nurturing one another, and I think that set me not just on a path of creating art, but of appreciating the value of community, which is something I've held ever since.
Wow, that's fantastic. What instruments did you play in the band?
Played the trumpet, the high school band, still play the trumpet if people are patient enough with me. I usually just play it in the recording studio so no one knows how many takes it takes me to get a decent take.
Right. Or you could even clip together
Yeah, that's
the
it.
best parts
Yeah.
of 20 takes.
Giving away the secrets now.
And play. What kind of was that, like Shakespeare? What kind of stuff?
At that time, it was pretty radical. They put on a major Shakespeare play every year, and they had boys lining up. This was 1968 that started. Boys would line up to be in the plays for a reason you'd never guess. You would get a note from the director saying that you weren't allowed to cut your hair. You had to have long hair to be in the Shakespeare play, and we all wanted that in 1968 and 69, but our parents often wouldn't let us. So you'd bring a note home, "I'm sorry, Mr. Conway says." And they go, "Oh, all right."
That's amazing. What a great little incentive. I thought you were going to say, oh, so that you could meet girls, or I don't know, whatever. But that's awesome.
Yeah, well, no, I did get into the music business to meet girls, and I'm going to stay in it till I do. All right.
So at what point did you transition from trumpet to guitar or something?
Well, I
more...
started also in high school. Just there was kids strumming guitars, and we'd have little jam sessions, and I was keen to join in. And it's funny, I only recently noticed there was a vast difference. And I have a degree in music from the University of Guelph, studied opera and theory and classical music, but I was paying my way through university by playing in bars, playing kind of poppy rock, folk stuff, hippie stuff.
Right.
And it was really just my university for that kind of music was just finding a community that would nurture you and support you, and I learned from them. And it wasn't until, I don't know, 10 years ago that I thought, okay, I have that, and that's sort of set me on my career path. But the training that I got in my music degree, I didn't use those tools often, but I'm realizing that they're there. They're underneath it all.
Yeah.
And I think, in fact, I had a great music teacher who said, "I want to teach you what I know, and then I'm hoping that you forget it." And what he meant was, you don't want to be too transparent in your technique, in your learning, but you want it to be a background for how you create.
Right.
And I think he succeeded in that with me.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. It's like, so when a song comes up, you don't necessarily recognize the source, but there, a chord progression could have been inspired by that kind of training.
Sure. Yeah. And as a listener of music, I can tell if someone's showing off their chops, kind of. So if that's not transparent, if it's just the music comes from the heart, but you've already got that technique down that you can deliver what is coming from your heart, then I think that resonates with the listeners and the readers.
Great. So let's move forward a bit to some in your adult years. What kinds of creators inspired you in any way, musically or in any creative form?
When I was in university, I was very inspired by sort of the edgier end of the classical field, and there's a great Canadian composer, R. Murray Schafer, who's a big influence on me because he'd do elaborate works out in the middle of the woods with only the people that partook in it could actually hear it. Just sort of pushing the envelopes. But when I was but 21, I foolishly opened up. I had spent a year studying music in London, England, which was at that time in the 1977 was a real hotbed for what became the coffee house scene. And I loved it. I should have been studying, but every night I was going to one of these places, listening to music, sometimes getting invited up on stage. So when I got back in the fall of 1977, I opened a coffee house in Guelph called the Carden Street Cafe.
Oh.
And it actually, I sold it in 1980 because it turned out to be a really stupid idea to try to be a musician on the road and run a restaurant at the same time.
Okay.
And I never even thought I'd be opening a restaurant, but I realized you had to pay the rent on the place. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'll make lunch. Okay, we'll make dinner. But at that point, there was a real flowering, especially of Ontario songwriters and folk performers. And there was a circuit that I became part of with my venue. And I had the very best folk performers. It only had 40 seats in it, although we used to bring all the milk crates out and pack as many as 80 people in for someone like Stan Rogers or
Wow.
string band or a lot of great artists. And that was my folk university. They were playing, and then we would have open mic nights. I learned about what worked, and I learned a lot about what didn't work too. You'd see performers where what they did didn't seem to be quite resonating, and I thought, okay, make a note of that, James. So they became, it was a unique situation for me because they became my friends. I still keep in touch with a lot of them, but they were my heroes as well and my mentors. And again, it is pretty small but vibrant still community.
Right.
There's a community of what we would call acoustic roots music in this country that is threatened constantly, but we support one another. And luckily there's enough musical consumers that still support it too, that some of us are able to make a livelihood at it.
Great. Are you Miles Gerber?
Kind of.
The lead character, or
Yeah.
one of the lead characters in his book, who's a traveling musician.
Right. Well, yeah, and we could even transition into mentioning the book a little bit. The character in the book, the lead character, is a songwriter, oddly enough, but here's an irony. I'm wearing what people call my Jim Cuddy shirt, because he has the same shirt. His name is James Gordon Cuddy, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. It's true.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And is your middle name Cuddy?
No, I should work on that. But his band Blue Rodeo has been big for 30 years, and I was obsessed with when the music business just before COVID was in deep crisis, still is, I guess. The question that whenever I'd meet other musicians was, where does this end? Where is this going? And I started the novel by thinking about a band that was a bit bitter, and the band sounded a little bit more like Blue Rodeo than my band. So but they're searching for a way, where's the end of the music business? They were kind of looking for it. And in the novel, they actually find an alternative to the end. They find a new direction to go in, which I was always looking for. So there's certainly echoes of what I do in the book, but I made sure that I based it on some of my experiences. It's a band on the road, but I didn't want it to be the James Gordon band.
Right. Okay, cool.
So maybe, that might be a chance for me to, I'll read you from the book, the very opening, and then I will sing a song from it. So I won't give away the plot, but the part that I will give away is that the novel is essentially a story about stories and the value of stories. We're fortunate to have the Massey Lectures a few years ago, or by Guelphite Tom King, and his whole thesis to his Massey Lectures was that all that we are the stories that we hold. And I've always held that very closely to me, thinking that, okay, if we can share our stories, if we can come to acknowledge what our own stories are and how we relate to the wider world, then we're farther ahead. He's the lead character, Miles Gerber. His band is called Miles Gerber and the Shit Disturbers. So they get to be a little political too, surprise, surprise. They meet a young woman who becomes their merch girl and road manager, and she notices that they're so burned out that when they're playing in these progressively worse venues, as they're still trying to make a living at it, in between sets they just go to the dressing room and hang out and they don't interact. And she said, well, they want to get to know you, and they have stories to tell, and you're a storyteller with your songs. So he starts to ask the audience if they've got a story to tell, and then he said, well, and this is where James Gordon comes in again, because I've learned how to write a song pretty quickly. He said, that's a great story. I'm playing down the road tomorrow night. If you come, I'll sing you a song based on the story you just told me. And they got cool, and it turns out that the whole town wanted to hear that, so they all traveled to the next town, and eventually it became this huge traveling caravan as they traveled east with every time there'd be a new song, and it sort of gave them a new purpose in life. So this is the opening of the book. And I'll give away too, and my favorite author, my favorite book of all time is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And if you read it, you'll understand more about me. And it's, I think, America's most banned book still, because he was a radical socialist when you weren't allowed to be. Probably not allowed to be anymore. So I emulated at the beginning of each chapter a lot of Steinbeck books. He just sort of sets the stage with just pulling back a little bit and looking down on what the characters are up to. So that's where this got its start. And there's I should say, there's a spot in here that I can always picture in my mind as the corner of York and Victoria in Guelph. So I don't know why. In the crisp spring morning, when the sun is just peeking over the townhouses and the industrial malls to the east, a long line of cars snails from the road and back around a small building that is identical to thousands like it dotted across the waking landscape. Exhaust from the cars rises straight up in the cool air, looking like coal smoke from Dickensian tenement chimneys, mingling together above, creating a dirty haze that filters out that thin sunlight. The cars are all lined up, pilgrims at a shrine dedicated to the memory of a dead hockey player. Hockey is sacred. Hockey is holy, so there is an air of reverence as the pilgrims pray with their engines idling, waiting to share in the corporate caffeine communion that keeps them coming back each morning at the same time. Eventually, each car makes it to a small window where they receive the communion like patients in a hospital ward receiving their medication. The cars are empty save for single occupants, sleepy supplicants who hand over a tithe, a humble portion of their earnings offered so that they might receive the blessed cup of hot, holy water, handed out by young virgins enslaved by the cult of the dead hockey player. Inside, the car radios squawk with classic rock, interrupted by chipper talk that urges the half-listeners to purchase products that come all the way from China. Items that were once made right in their own towns by their parents and grandparents before all those factories closed. Many of those factories were now converted to loft condominiums where many of the owners of those cars live. Along with their caffeine, the worshippers receive wrapped, lukewarm packages representing the holy trinity of their daily diet: salt, sugar, and fat. This gift is received with gratitude for the miracle that the dead hockey player has performed for them. They can do all this without leaving the cars that they have a similar devotion to. These carbon-spewing chariots bear their occupants from the morning mass at the Church of the Holy Defenseman to their jobs that are farther away every year, along arteries as clogged as the ones in their own bulging bodies. that are filled with donuts from that same church. The cars lurch along past ditches littered with paper cups that no longer contain their precious fluid, accompanied by plastic lids that the worshippers have struggled to open without spilling their steaming stimulant on the seats of their dearly beloved cars. They love those cars more than they love their families, for they spend more time with them. Conspicuous in the line of cars is an old battered van that may once have been white, containing 2 weary passengers and a rebel driver, clearly a heathen who has declined to take the morning communion at the drive-through window of wonders. He is regaling his poor passengers with a righteous sermon that reinforces his profane belief that those passive dough-eating parishioners are the real sinners, while he, with his Gandhi-esque denial of consumerist comforts, is the saint. This was in the dying days of the empire of oil. So, and as we so ably heard, there's a QR code in the book that guides you to the songs, and this is the first one that I wrote for the book, and I sort of let the characters guide it, and he went to a little small town, this writer in Manitoba, and he asked if anyone had a story, and a woman in the audience, shy woman, got up and he invited her on stage, and he said, well, nobody, she said, I don't think anyone really would want to hear my story. And that's actually been the story of my creative life. Canadians are too modest about their own tales. And in fact, our Canadian songwriters are the same. You probably have heard dozens of songs about the hills of Tennessee. And maybe even if you haven't been to Tennessee, you can picture it. That's because American writers include their own geography as part of the fabric of their work. We don't do that as much. I'm trying to change that. But anyway, he says to the woman, well, do you have a dream? And she said, well, I dream of having a dream. She said, I haven't got a purpose, and that's what I'm looking for. So she tells him this, and then he writes this song for her. It's called Dreaming of a Dream. And it actually took me 4 years to write the book, so a couple of the songs that I wrote for the book ended up on one of my albums too, which is this one. If I had a dream to fly on, I'd let it carry me away. Something I could rely on to get me through these lonely days. If I had a dream to try on that fit me like a glove, I'd need no shoulder to cry on. I'd be on my way to love. Dreaming of a dream that could deliver me from this broken cowboy town. Something to hold on to drive away those thoughts that want to always bring me down. If I had a dream that was all mine, to nurture like it was a child, I'd raise it tall and fine, and I'd let it run wild. If I had a dream I could ride like it was a noble steed, lead me to a sign that would set me free. Dreaming of a dream that could deliver me from this broken cowboy town. There's something to hold on to drive away those thoughts that want to always bring me down. The prairie dust blows down my street, gathering around my feet. It's in my eyes so I can't see on these messed up memories. If I had a dream to fly out, I'd let it carry me away. Something I could rely on to get me through these lonely days. Now, I can tell you something. I think this is just too out there, maybe. But that song was written by Miles Gerber, not James Gordon. And I think
channeled it.
He wrote better songs than I do. But I had to really think of that. Okay, who is he, this character? He's a songwriter like me, but how would he approach it? And it freed me up. It was incredible. I could just write through him. And also, there were stories built in. And I know we talked a bit earlier, this might be part of a different area of questioning, but I think that I write, I don't want to say better, but I write more frequently if I'm not waiting for an idea to fall from the heavens. If I go, oh, well, I'm working on a chapter for a book and it needs a song. I know what it's about. Or if I get commissioned to write a song about climate change or something like that, I'll say, okay, and I really learned it with that songwriter in residence gig with CBC Radio, where they'd say, James, we need a song by Friday, and here's what it needs to be about. And I, at first, think, well, I am a sensitive artiste. I do not do that. And then I go, oh, okay, well.
I'm not for sale.
Yeah, well, that's shifting, and this is an important part of my journey. There's a slight difference, and I would like to hear from you about that too, between the art and the craft. So sometimes if you say, okay, write me a song by Friday, I draw more on my experience as a craftsman as to, okay, how do I put this together and what do I say? Then the art part almost is the icing on that cake once you've used your craft for it.
Right. It's like, it's that thing, you need to practice something to be able to do it well.
Yeah.
You need that spark to do something original and unique each time you apply the craft. That's the art and the craft, right? But if you don't know the craft, it can be more difficult unless you're a genius or it just flows out of you to actually master the art part.
Yeah, and I often tell younger artists that they'll say, well, I nothing's inspiring me to write about. And I always say, well, there's no excuse for that. There's a million things out there. Maybe it hasn't moved you personally, but do that channeling again. Here's something that I think your audience will really care about. Mm-hmm. And put yourself in their position. And then you've made, I think the reason why at my advanced age I still am in this game is that when you've created something that someone in the audience can say, boy, that felt like that was about me. Then you've made a really valuable and sometimes pretty intimate connection. And that's what it's all about to me. Mm. I have a strong memory of, I was playing a concert in, I think it was Ancaster, Ontario. And there was a guy at the back of the hall, a small enough hall that I could see him clearly, and he was just so involved. And at the break, he came up and he said, it felt like you were singing those songs directly to me. And I said, to me, I thought, well, that's my goal. That's what it's all about. So I said, well, I'm honored. And he looked at me and he said, were you?
And you said,
yeah,
of course.
Naturally. Yeah. There might have been 100 other people that I was trying to meet too, but that connection is what it's all about for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a great distinction of like putting it out there for others as opposed to just an internal self-driven sort of process.
And in fact, I do these songwriting retreat weekends that I gathered writers together to work on our craft, and I've noticed that the younger artists often, if got a guitar and you're writing songs, often you're doing it in your bedroom because you're bummed out, right?
Yeah.
Or your heart is broken. And if I don't care about you in that song unless I can recognize something of myself in it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I always say, get off the bed, go outside and connect with people. And then maybe your songs don't always have to be written in the first person. The most overused word in any form of writing is the word I.
Right.
And for my prose writing, you can create a character. And in songwriting too, there's often the first person, but it doesn't have to be you. In fact, that can be a dangerous thing too. I'm a big fan of Steve Earle. You guys know Steve Earle work?
Yep.
The poor guy, I've seen him at a couple of festivals. He's a mild-mannered Buddhist, and he has bike gangs following him around all the time because he had one hit song that was written in the first person about him being a redneck guy that ran a still.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then dealt
They think
through
that
drugs
must be,
too. Yeah.
that must be who that
He
guy
is. Yeah.
But if you can separate yourself out, you've got so much more room to work. If you give yourself a character, and you can run with that character who often might have a more interesting life than someone locked in their garret writing.
Yeah. And I hear stories, like people's stories are a way for you to access characters or ideas and creative inspiration, right? Is hearing a story, somebody talking in passing about something, or you could write a song about that guy at the back of the room and say, were you writing about me? Right?
Well, I am, and be careful if you see me in a restaurant, I am a professional eavesdropper. Like I have a little dream catcher above my bed, but I'm really a story catcher. And I like to find them and turn them around. And in fact, that's a little bit about what this Artist in Residence project I'm doing right now is too.
Cool. But that's fairly recent. Like you just started writing a novel and story. And now have you been writing stories in prose form for a long time, or is that?
Not really, yeah.
So what shifted there where you went from writing lyrics to prose?
I think what I needed, I noticed, I can actually think of a particular day where I had a concert coming up and had hired my neighbor, Sandy Horn, to play the bass for me.
With spoons.
Yeah. And we were practicing away, and I brought another song to the table, and she said, that doesn't sound like a James Gordon song. And I was shocked. I went, well, what does a James Gordon song sound like? And she said, well, you have patterns, and I sort of know where you're going in the chorus and in the bridge. And I went, ooh, is that good?
Am I predictable?
Yeah, maybe I'm too predictable. And I think it's because I've written, I think, 2,000 songs at least now. I can't stop. But you do there's a risk of being a bit formulaic that way. I know what works and you go with it. And that was, to use the visual arts imagery, a 3.5-minute song was my palette that I was working with. So I thought, well, I better shift that up a little bit. And that's when the novel was an idea that came from, okay, a song might be 150 words max, because you have a chorus that repeats. Our attention spans are getting shorter, so we like our songs shorter. And this novel is 88,000 words. So it was a different focus for me. You needed different tools, although, that there's similarities in the technique, but it was mostly to shake things up for me.
Right. And hearing some of your ideas that, like, the book has multiple characters.
Correct.
So the chapters shift from one character to another, and they'll come back to another, and including Nellie Bell,
Yeah.
who is a
She's
a
a
van.
1981 Ford Econoline van. She drove the band around so long that she figured out how to write her own songs.
and actually write prose as well.
Yes, that's right.
Because
She's
she's
the narrator.
hearing all kinds of great stories from as the band are inside and they're driving these long trips that she's hearing all this great juicy stuff. So.
Right.
But back to multiple characters, and that's a way to access multiple stories and multiple points of view. And did that make it easier for you than writing the whole book from, say, Miles' point of view or the drummers? Or
Yeah, I think, in fact, that's probably a holdover from my songwriting in that I do like to give a song a character. My first band, if some of you are familiar with, I played for 20 years in a band called Tamarack. And we actually had a kind of a mandate that came sort of intuitively because we noticed other people weren't doing it in Canada, which was to tell the story of the Canadian experience and the Canadian landscape. We have a lot of Canadian history, so very few of those songs, and we did 14 albums. I can't think of one that was written with me in the first person. I was always finding, and the coolest thing was if we do a concert, someone would always come up after and say, that story you sang about the railroad, that reminds me of a story my grandfather told me. And then you'd have another story. So you'd be able to give those stories the character of who you thought was in that position and at that time. That was a big learning for me.
Yeah. Are you able to articulate that intuitive way to hear someone's story and know, okay, that's something that is going to resonate with other people?
Actually, I think that comes from just being on the road for 40 years, where I have a radical theory about art that some people don't agree with, but I don't think a work of art is complete unless it is shared. I think you have to, it's a community experience too. If you just do a painting and put it in your closet, you're not done, to me. You need that feedback, and sometimes in doing a concert, I would sing a new song and sometimes people would come up and say, well, what album's that song on? That meant a lot to me. And I said, well, it's just brand new. And you go, okay, I'd have to analyze my own work. There's something in there that they latched onto. And then there's also ones that maybe didn't look like they latched onto it. So my work shifts depending on what resonates, and that resonance comes from sharing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can get it without that shared experience.
Right. Hence the challenge of musicians and of, people are sitting at home listening to Spotify as opposed to connecting, or you're not getting that feedback to know, is it resonating?
Yeah.
Until they, send you a note on Facebook or something. So,
in fact, during COVID, all of us in the business got frustrated because we were road warriors, all my companions, and we needed that feedback. We needed that ego boost too, I think. So I actually remember complaining about this. I took to doing a little thing called Tuesday tunes at 2. Every Tuesday I would sing live a couple of tunes and put them on social media. And at one point I complained. I said, I'm working on songs, but I have no one to bounce them off. And somebody made a comment and said, James, we're your ether friends out there in vacuum land. We're the road now for you. So share it with us and we'll give you the feedback. So it was almost reinventing that sort of an online community that I never quite warmed up enough to it as I'd like to, because even though you've got people listening to you and watching you on that little screen, I'm still all by myself in my little studio going, well, is anybody out there?
Yeah.
So it's an abstract thing, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was a way. You have to find new ways to connect when we weren't able to with COVID.
Yeah. yeah. And now you're finding things returning back to some semblance of pre-COVID connection with the
Yeah.
community.
Back on the road again. I started last fall. I don't mean to grumble, but I'm going to anyway. The big change was people were, on the one hand, the people that came were delighted to be back in an audience too. And yet the audiences were smaller because a certain number of people just, you guys know this, they just stopped going out to things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing it anymore. So, and they don't want to pay any more than they did for a ticket 20 years ago. And the hotels and car rentals and airfares have probably tripled since those ticket prices were that.
Yeah.
So it's very unsustainable right now, and that's a real struggle from all my peers. But we have to find new ways.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To get it out there, because that's
Yeah.
you still got to get it out there to get that sense of flow.
Sure. And the creative part is hard to separate out the business part, which I don't like that correlation. But for instance, you mentioned I spent some of my time being a record producer. Nowadays, if someone wants me to produce an album for them, the first and unfortunate question is, well, you probably don't want to spend more making this record than you'll get back from people that will buy it, and nobody's buying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you get past that? So I'm finding, the technology has helped. You can make a pretty decent album with a microphone and a laptop now, which puts me out of work.
Yeah.
But it's changed the dynamic of, you'll pick up an album, hopefully you're paying for it, one way or another, either by downloading it, streaming, bad news all around for any artist. However, if you're not getting the kind of product that you used to be able to spend $20,000 making with a big band, and if you're only going to sell a couple hundred copies, you're going to be broke pretty fast.
Yeah.
So I noticed the sound is changed by the conditions and the economics too.
Meaning the quality of the recordings
Well, no,
or the
you can still
quality
make
of the
a great
songwriting?
sound, but it's if the audience is smaller, then the music is smaller. Like it's usually just a guy with a guitar.
Right.
If you're that-
Or loops and
Yeah,
auto tune.
That's right.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, let's hear something live
Yeah.
and something unique and something real. Let's connect with.
That's a pretty big ask. I'm going to read you something
Give
from
us
the
a
newest
little.
book, which is related to the novel because those are stories, imaginary stories about being on the Canadian road musicians. This is my actual stories, and if you're not on it already, I'll badger you into signing my newsletter list because for 20 years I've sent out a road story every month. So I sort of updated them and find out which ways things belong together and put out this book of road stories, tales from my 40-year romance with the road. And actually, here's the little opening paragraph of it, which says a lot about what I'm trying to do. I've been a professional wandering minstrel for more than 40 years. Name a place. Yep, I've played there. All in all, I'm pleased to say that the money's been terrible, the driving has been endless, the food mediocre, the motels overpriced, and the glamorous lifestyle extremely overrated. I've loved every minute of it. I still can't sleep at night because I'm impatient to see what the next day brings, and because there's often a snoring bandmate in the next bed. There's always a story, an adventure, not a rip-roaring adventure, a nice quirky little one, which is how I'm often described in my reviews. Modest, understated Canadian adventures, always some moment, an interaction, a smile, a stop along the way, something that suddenly makes it all seem worthwhile, just like Mary Tyler Moore driving into Minneapolis. I've fashioned some sort of a career by sprinkling song dust on these moments and singing them every night to complete strangers. The magic part of my job, the thing that keeps me doing this, is that sharing those stories transforms those strangers into friends within minutes. I've written down some of them, some of my favorite tales for you here. I hope you enjoy them. See you along the road somewhere. So I've actually got, even though these are road stories, a couple of them are Guelph-centric. So I'm gonna read one of those for you, a short one, and then sing you a song that also has a Guelph connection.
Is it like a game where we'll have to guess what part of Guelph?
Yeah. So turn to page, let's see. I had this. Oh yeah, this one took place in Guelph. It was actually at a seniors home in the ward that I represented as a counselor. Okay, who did the index to this, really?
And have the names been changed to protect the innocent?
No, I'm not that nice a guy. People said if they've read this book, they said, James, you've had this disastrous career. But really, a good gig doesn't have a story necessarily that goes with it. Yep, people came, I made some money, I had a great time, I went on. But the quirky ones that had some weird aspect to it are the ones that ended up making me sit down to write the story out. So this took place in Guelph, and I played at the Stroke Survivors Luncheon. I've never learned how to say no to this kind of freebie event. I have so many brownie points accumulated now, I'm tempted to cash them in for the dinette suite or the patio furniture. Why, if I had a nickel for every freebie I've done, they wouldn't be freebies, they'd be nickelies. My old friend Murdo asked me to perform a few songs for the luncheon at the seniors' home just down the road from me. They lurk just down the road for all of us. It was a good cause. The Stroke Survivors Club does some really important work. The morning of the show, a nice lady from the organization phoned to say that she was bringing a special sandwich for me to the luncheon. That was that pesky I mentioned another place in the book. The only thing I tell for my contract is that I don't eat red meat. And tried saying that in Alberta, man. She also said that she was very much looking forward to hearing my speech about music therapy, and she wondered if my wife was feeling better. These two items confused me. This was the first I had heard about music therapy, and I didn't think my wife had been feeling poorly. Then she remarked that she was amazed that I had the time for such a busy music career and to do all that volunteer work in Africa. Okay, this was getting a little too far-fetched. After a bit of cross-examining, I deduced that there was 2 James Gordons in Guelph, the hugely successful music superstar that you all know, and the African volunteer worker married to a stroke victim. I've heard of this other guy before, since he gives slideshows of his African adventures around town sometimes. And it's actually more confusing now, because in January I went to Africa and did the same kind of work. She had apparently received a letter from him, the other James Gordon, expressing interest in her group because of his wife's illness. She figured the letter was from me, and somehow she had concocted the music therapy speech and the special sandwich all on her own. I showed up at the senior center just as they were beginning the lunch. I was enthusiastically greeted by the group, many of whom asked with grave concern about my wife's health. About half of them seemed to be expecting a short presentation of my local history Guelph songs, and the rest were anticipating my therapy speech. I decided that I'd make something up to satisfy both factions. The nice lady presented me with my sandwich. Turns out they had all brought their own lunch, but since I was the guest of honor, she was bringing mine. I didn't know what kind you liked, so I brought 2, she said. The sandwiches, both of them, were identical. Both ham and mayo. Go figure. I can't do either of those ingredients. I felt like a naughty kid scraping out the insides in secret and eating the bread. When my turn came in the proceedings, I went to the center of the room and without any microphones or amplification began to sing. The singing seemed to be a cue to the cafeteria staff immediately behind me to sort out the cutlery supply. They clanged away throughout the song. I wondered why this only seemed to be bothering me, and also wondered why there was so much cutlery when we all had bag lunches. The next song was a little more sensitive, so the cafeteria orchestra moved on to scraping plates and stacking cups. For the third song, the piped-in music for the senior center came blasting out of the ceiling just above my head. Henry Mancini, as a matter of fact. This didn't seem to bother my audience either. They had already had strokes. It was just me that was contemplating one. It occurred to me that many of them were hard of hearing and that they were just being entertained by my pained expression. Someone did get up to ask the staff to turn off the music, though. It started again during each of the next two numbers. I changed tack and gave a brief improvised chat about, yes, music therapy, which was well received, even though an emergency alarm from the nearby nursing station went off in the middle of my speech. I thought the speech was superior to the songs, and I was curious that the cutlery clanging stopped during it. I tried one more song and concluded my bit to a sincere round of applause. I was officially thanked. They all wished me success on my next visit to Africa, wished my wife a speedy recovery, and I made a run for the elevator where it was just me and Henry Mancini. So here's a song from that book, and this also has a Guelph connection. Although it's called Lamas on the Road. And maybe some of you went to this too, but years ago, the Tibetan Lamas had a little touring act. They came to War Memorial Hall and did their thing. It was very inspiring. But as a road musician, I was too distracted by their tour bus that was out the back of the hall. I'm going, well, what on earth would it be like on the road for those guys? So I made this up for them. Let's see. Oh, don't do that. There you go. Well, they packed up their incense, their bells and their robes. The Lamas are headed out on the road. It's a long, long way from Tibet to LA, but those Lamas want the world to know how they release their ecstatic sounds. They demonstrate the inner peace they found. 2 sets a night out under the lights, then it's back on the bus they go. Picture those poor dizzy Lamas going round and round at Disneyland, which they apparently did. Not exactly your great sphere of sacred bliss. Down in Hollywood and Vine, they offer a prayer to purify Tinseltown. The monastery never was like this. Ah, the Lamas dance and the Lamas sing about the evils of all worldly things. One last curtain call, then it's off to the mall for a little shopping trip. What do the forces of goodness and light do for fun on a Saturday night? Would the wise ones approve if they went cruising along the Sunset Strip? A dinner at the Taco Bell and back at the El Rancho Motel. They watch TV and they try to meditate. Tomorrow there's a double bill with Kenny Rogers out in Beverly Hills. They invoke the awakening ones so they don't sleep late. Ah, their agent calls from Malibu. He wonders if the boys could do maybe 1 or 2 more upbeat tunes and tell a couple Tibetan jokes. He tells them that the show's a hit, but could they tighten the longevity dance a bit? You got to please the fans with short attention spans, and remember, you're sponsored by Coke. Picture those poor dizzy Lamas going round and round at Disneyland. Not exactly your great sphere of sacred bliss. Down in Hollywood and Vine, they offer a prayer to purify Tinseltown. The monastery never was like this.
Wonderful. And that's also available for download with the
True.
book, right?
True.
Excellent. And there is that, I know for Ark of the Oven Mitt, they're like fully produced band. There's like all
Yes.
multiple musicians and like backup singers and
For
such.
the novel, I would like to acknowledge the generous assistance of the Ontario Arts Council that gave me a fund to bring in, some of Ontario's best musicians to record as if they were, actually, I'll give you one more detail of the novel. Miles Gerber was in a hit band in the 80s called Miles and Miles. And he was Miles Gerber, and his partner at the time was named Maddie Miles. And they had hits and everything, and they split up, so he started the Shit Disturbers and started traipsing around the country feeling kind of lost. But so when I got the grant, I said to the band, I said, we got to read the book, and we have to sound like those two different bands. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. Huh. Talk a bit about collaboration, like working with other creators. And what you talked about, Sandy Horn. You've got, you've worked here with these musicians. What do you get from that? What do you give to that?
I think I love collaborating with musicians on arranging my songs. They always have better musicians and they have good ideas that I might not have thought of myself. So playing with a band is a joy. I had to abandon it pretty well economically. I'm mostly touring solo right now, but I'm doing a show at the River Run in November with the best band in the land backing me up. And it's a side note that Mike would know about. That was always my home, playing at the River Run. But once a year, when I was elected to city council, I wasn't allowed to.
Conflict of interest?
Conflict of interest. Yeah. But anyway, that's my favorite form of collaboration. I'm still not as comfortable as I'd like to be about songwriting as collaborating, because it's a very personal thing for me, and yet there's some new things come out of it. Every now and then, the songwriter's mecca, even not just for country music, is Nashville, and they have a whole machinery there that they pump all their songs. If you look at who wrote the hit songs, there's always like 6 names attached to them, almost written by committee. And I've gone down there a couple times to try to flog my own work, and you end up getting paired up with other writers. And at first it felt like it was sucking the personal aspect right out of it. And in fact, I went with the last time I went was my dear friend and neighbor Katherine Wheatley, who's a great Canadian songwriter. And she had, I thought, more commercial songs than I did. And we sat down in a publisher's office time, and she sang them a song, and he said, well, you've written a 10 o'clock at night song. And I said, what's that? And he said, all we're looking for is songs that soccer moms can listen to on the radio in the morning when they're driving their kids to school. 7:30 in the morning song.
Wow.
Has to be peppy, and it can't have too much message in it. That'll mess people's minds. And she said, count me out, I can't do that. I'm a total songwriting whore. I said, bring it on. Yeah, want me to write about a truck? I'll do that. And yet, at the same time, I never felt like what my contribution was doing my own craft and art any favors, or even the constituency that I've developed as people that want to listen to my music. So I'm still learning that where I think to co-write with someone, you have to have a pretty personal connection with too, so that you understand each other, then you can produce something.
And coincidentally, there is a track on the Oven Mitt that you co-wrote with Katherine Wheatley.
That's right, and she sings it. Yeah.
So how did that come about then?
Yeah. When she moved to Guelph, she called me, and I've kept the term an emergency songwriter. She said, I've got this song, I just can't finish it. Can you come over and help? And we finished it, and then we thought, hey, well, that worked. So whenever we both were looking for something a little different, we start to co-write together. We actually wrote a whole musical together that sits on a shelf somewhere because we both got too busy to do anything about it.
Wow, you should talk to the Downtown Theater Project.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Somebody else we could bring up here for a future event. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna ask you one more, and then are you open to questions
Yes,
from the
please.
audience too? Okay. And this speaks to, again, reaching out, putting it out there into the community, but in a broader way, even because you've written songs about social justice, environmental issues, capitalism, corporate greed. How do you think creativity and creating things makes a difference in correcting or righting wrongs or correcting society's course towards something more sustainable, something more community-minded?
Yeah, well, I think artists, to my dismay, have lost track of this a bit, but I think we have a responsibility to have a social conscience that we can share. And I did learn a lesson, I think, because I think I started to write politically oriented songs just by living in Guelph, and people say, hey, we're having a rally on Sunday. Have you got a song that goes with that cause? And I'd write one. But I think that nobody, even if they're espousing a cause that we share, wants to have you point, as an artist, you point your finger at them and say, you're living your life wrong. And in fact, one of the songs in the novel is called, I'd actually written it, I incorporated some of my earlier songs by adapting them into the novel. And one of the songs is called Gotta Get Off the Oil. And I wrote it, I was too righteous. I was saying, hey, you gotta get off the oil. We're getting screwed by this. And someone, I shared it with someone and they said, well, take that finger away or turn it on to yourself. Like, don't you have to get off the oil too, James? And so I changed the perspective of the song to mean we have to do this collectively. So if you're hammering someone over the head with a message or pointing your finger at them, they're gonna flip that channel really quickly. But if you can give a voice to something that they've been feeling, or pointing not with your finger, but through your art towards solutions that you see, directions that you think would be productive to follow up, then the arts can lead the way for social change, which is what it was always supposed to do, I think. And we've lost track of that. Everyone, because I'm so old now, if I sing a song that sounds kind of like a protest song, they say, oh, that's kind of like Bob Dylan in the 60s, right?
Right.
And he made a reputation for that. He was standing up, following in the footsteps of Woody Guthrie. And somewhere along the line, I think, okay, this is me being a socialist radical again, but also in the 60s, when that kind of music started to be, those were hit songs, the music industry became corporatized to an unbelievable level, so that the dollars ruled what got on the air, instead of what people seem to want to hear.
Right. Literally, the payolas.
That's right.
They would pay to have songs
For
played
sure.
on the air.
So I think giving yourself permission to explore issues that are important to you, but also by sharing that could be important to, again, build another community. That would be the advocacy community, right?
Wonderful. Thanks. All right. Anybody out there have a question for James about his creative process, his inspiration, about his stories? Dave.
Yeah, I was just wondering what route you took for publication for your book.
Oh,
Did everyone hear the question?
what route did you take
For
for publication?
publication.
It's a sad story. I had, for 20 years, I was on a record label called Borealis Records. And a great label, had best Canadian roots artists on it. And I told them about this book I was writing and that it had songs in it. And they said, what do you think? Does it fit into your mandate? And they said, for sure, that'd be it's a cool angle. It's got the songs in it, and we have all those connections, so we could publish it even though we're not necessarily a book publisher. And just as they were ready to do that, the whole company was sold, comparable corporatization, to a bigger record label. And ironically, it was a label that I've dreamt my whole adult life of being on. True North Records that had Bruce Cockburn and Buffy St. Marie and Murray McLaughlin and all those, my heroes. So I said, fantastic. So I called up the president of the company and said, hey, happy to be on the team. I've got this new project. And he went, whoop. He said, we bought your back catalog. We're selling everything you've already done, but we don't have the resources or the capacity right now to bring anything new of yours in. So I actually, at the last minute, even though that had been my dream, I had to hire a lawyer to get out of my contract with True North so that I could put out the book. And I went hunting for publishers. And ironically, book publishers said, well, that's kind of outside what we do. Is kind of music and it's books. And I ended up basically publishing it myself. And it's, the book publishing world, some of you know, is as brutal as the music business, if not more so. There's getting distributed, even now that I have a self-published book, really hard to get it distributed. There are really only, they'll just tell you downstairs at the bookshelf, there really are only about half a dozen publishers. There's dozens of publishing companies, but they've all been merged and they're all owned by these different companies. So I'm hoping that I just pretty well run out of the novel. I'm doing another printing. It's done well. People buy it on the road when they won't buy a CD. So I'm hoping that to leverage it and say, okay, maybe there's a wider audience that'd be interested in this. But that's an awful long way to say that I ended up doing it myself.
Did you consider changing your name to a symbol and putting
Yeah.
slave on your face?
Yeah. Why not?
Another question? Over here, yeah.
I've written a few songs over the years,
Uh-huh.
very slowly. It always takes me even a couple of years of getting stuck and unstuck.
Huh.
I was wondering if you could talk more about how you write songs very quickly.
Yeah. I think that's just practice that they come quickly, although I'm a big fan huge Beatles fan, read a lot about how, especially Paul McCartney, his songs together, they worked to deadlines too. That band was putting out, 2 albums a year, I think, like that, and they'd say, okay, there's a recording session on Tuesday, you gotta have some new songs for it. So that's the craft part, but he also had those great ears to bounce off too, right? He'd bring something to the band, and we always think all those songs were written by Lennon and McCartney, but apparently almost none of them were. One of them would bring a song, and the other one would say, well, maybe the middle eight could use a little lift on it, or maybe we could try this. So
Right here, here's a bridge. Try this for the bridge, just to mix it
So
up.
he had instant feedback, and I highly recommend that. Even if your song's not finished, test it out at an open mic or something like that.
Yeah.
And also, this sounds funny, but they're just songs, so don't kill yourself. I have songs that I've written quickly, and if they don't come in a couple of days, instead of agonizing, I'll put them away, and sometimes picking them up again, you've had a changed experience, you've got a different vibe happening, and you'll just go, oh, that's what that needs. So I think don't let those songs get to you in
Right.
a way too.
Yeah, you've got somebody right beside you can bounce songs
Yeah,
off. I know at least one other songwriter in the
do
room.
the bouncing.
And another one here. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, for me, that put it aside and let your subconscious work on it and be inspired by something else, a movie, a TV show, a book, another song, and go, oh, there's a neat idea that I could do. So
The other thing I'm still learning about songwriting is I still don't know, and maybe this is part of this challenge you've had, I can't tell when a song's done.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And usually that's testing it out too. And I often, maybe it's my age, but when I'm touring with new songs, I often still have the sheet music in front of me because I can think of 8 or 10 verses that didn't make it into the song, right? While I'm singing. And sometimes the winnowing down comes from performing, well, I think that third verse kind of said the same thing as the second verse did.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wrote that third verse because I thought it needed 3 verses, right?
Right.
So, yeah, road testing is really important, but also, I always, my first rule of songwriting is think of your listener first. Don't think of yourself first. So, do they get it, or do they need to get it? Do you care, or do they understand where you're coming from? And if they do, then you've made that connection with them. But trying to pull yourself out of your interior brain and thinking, well, how is this landing as I'm singing this? That's really been a valuable tool for me too.
Excellent. One more question before we turn it out to you.
And then we're doing massive networking, is that what happened?
Massive networking.
Okay.
Yes, there's going to be checks signed and
Okay.
contracts and.
All right.
No? Okay.
There's.
Oh, wait, we got one over here. Yes, please.
Not so much a question, just a thank you.
Oh,
Peter, for starting this whole concept.
yeah, it's a great
Because-
idea. Appreciate it.
Because listening to James as a visual decorative artist, I'm hearing so many echoes in your process, in your ups, your downs, your experiences through COVID, all these things. My world's completely different than yours, and yet the
Yep.
stories are very similar. And
Cool.
if you're going to keep bringing in people from all over the creative spectrum, I'm really intrigued to see where this is going to go.
Yeah.
Because this is a really good start.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Nice.
All right. Well, we can't do all the work tonight because it's about you as well. So this is the time for you to sort of go out there. I can give you a couple of seed questions if you might need one. Ask someone beside you, ideally who you don't know well, how do they express themselves creatively? Or what's something they've always wanted to do but have been too shy to try, or just never had the time to, or had whatever number of excuses. And if you are a creator, share what you do. Maybe somebody can say, oh, you should go talk to Jesse because he plays bass guitar or whatever. Yeah, just be supportive, constructive. And if you can't find something there, talk to Damien, ask somebody else, hey, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to support you in finding a resource for that. James will be at the back table there with some of his merchandise.
Yeah, turning into a capitalist at the back.
That's right. No, it's not quite that extreme. Not at all. It's covering the costs of that material so that it can get out to people.
Very
That's
nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna borrow that.
No problem. Thank you again, Damien and the Guelph Arts Council for creating the space, holding the space, giving us the space. Ed Video, thank you very much. There's all kinds of resources at Ed Video and Media Arts Center. They do graphic design. They've got like a Illustrator classes coming up and DaVinci Resolve. There's editing. There's anything you can think of that's a visual or an audio medium, and how to express your creativity through them individually, whether it's 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, film, whatever. There's all kinds of really interesting media options.
And if I can make a plug, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I'm at the East Side Library branch on, is that Starwood?
Yes, Starwood and Watson.
Yeah, and I'll be doing my artist-in-resident shtick, so come and tell me a story, and the gathering there will take one of the stories and we'll turn it instantly into a song.
Wow. And does jamesgordon.ca
Yes.
tell about this new storytelling project?
If it doesn't, then I need to get on my webmaster, who is me.
Okay. But you can at least send them an email or get on the newsletter if you have an idea for a story or you know somebody, or, oh, he's got to hear this person's story, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Go forth and create.